offer window if you haven't watched it already, and then the main presentation for this. So again, my name is Nate. Happy to be here with you all tonight. I'm with Perkins Eastman. Erin from my team is here as well. So you remember her from, it's harder to remember names and faces from virtual meetings. So great to see you all in person. And then quickly, just before we jump in, wanted to give some folks in the back from MPS a chance to introduce themselves. We have some content specific folks who are joining us tonight. Really happy to have them to support the meeting. So if I can put you on the spot.
No problem. Hello, I'm Dana Berlin. I'm the interim senior director of talent management. I'm the recent facility planning analyst, design construction.
Michelle, I'm the manager of design construction.
Michael Spidell, manager of enrollment for student services.
Kevin Raymer, facility analyst.
I'm Janice, just not taking today.
Janice is with our partner organization, Prism, who you may have met at any of our previous community engagement efforts. So yeah, thanks, Janice. So yeah, if you had a chance to do the activity, we can take a quick look, but we do have a lot to get through tonight, so we will try to move quickly. Just some of the feedback that we've gotten from the other steering committee meetings, just from that survey that we pass out, is to try to really limit the amount of time that we spend with us presenting to you and maximize the amount of time that people have to sort of work together. So we do have the room next door as well. And as we get into that sort of breakout conversation space, we'll sort of divide up so it's not too loud in this one space. But yeah, we will sort of jump in here. Or Lauren, did we want to take a peek at the responses? So I think it is the next one over. Yeah. How complex enrollment is. I will agree with that answer. So yeah, a lot of details to dig into there. And so having Mike from Student Services is great. And then Nick Sinram from the budget team will be joining us a little bit later. And he'll come in and sort of share some details at the top that we found have sort of been consistently helpful with the breakout groups and really just trying to maximize the time you'll have. So yeah, like I said, if you want to keep this QR code active, there will be another thing as we go. But for now, we'll sort of jump into the meeting. So this is our second meeting. Happy to have you all. We'll start out with just some quick admin items, welcome details, and then quickly go over the landscape analysis. Hopefully you had a chance to review that ahead of time. So we sent out just a recording of kind of the presentation again to try to minimize the amount of presenting happening here. If you do have any clarifying questions, feel free to ask them. I may sort of ask to put a pin in them so we can discuss them more in the breakout groups, and I'll try to point out any information or questions that have come up in the other steering committee meetings that's helpful context, and just as we move through those. From there, we'll go into just kind of so we've been doing a district versus region analysis at the regional meetings, but just because we're here with the Citywide group and we have representatives with us who are also in the regional steering committee meetings, steering committees, excuse me. We'll just kind of share some high level takeaways of what we heard in those meetings from the breakout conversations so that we have that as sort of the starting point. And if there are pieces that we miss as we get into it, we'll allow the regional folks to sort of fill in any gaps. Then we'll go into the small group work. The last bit I want to just mention at the top, the community insights question. So this is where that poll everywhere tool will be used again. After this meeting and after we're talking about enrollment, budgeting, staffing, et cetera, and really digging into that, we would like to invite you all to help us develop the questions that we should be asking the wider community and really understanding any data that we're not collecting to date or questions that we haven't been asking in the right way or seeking the right details. So it's been kind of a rolling poll on there. You can upvote the answers that you see on there that you like and you think are great, or you can downvote the ones that you think are less relevant. And we'll kind of use that as a way to, from each committee that's been doing the same tool, to see what are those top questions that are maybe appearing more than once. And then we would have those be sort of a rotating set of questions in the community insights form rather than creating 10 different forms. So as much as I'm saying a lot of words, we are actually trying to simplify it. That is the intent, and I think we'll get there. So explaining that now so we don't have to later and can really max the time on the breakout work. And then we'll just look ahead to April. Great, so moving into the administrative items. So quickly, if you are on solely the Citywide committee, you have a binder now in front of you. Hopefully, if you don't, we have a couple, I think, that are floating around. So if you don't, we'll make sure you get one. But that should have a bunch of materials that are also stored in Google Drive. So you should have digital copies of all that as well. the maps of the regions that are also posted on the wall here. So that is just to help understand which schools are falling in which geographic region. We have a map of private and non-MPS public schools, so independent charters, non-instrumentality charters as well in there, as well as, you know, a number of other resources, some of which have been added to the Google Drive. If you have issues with access, I know I've gotten a couple of requests for people who are maybe using different emails. We want to make sure that you have access to all the materials, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Going on from there, so sorry, this was just for the Southwest region. We had some community insights feedback, wanted to at least highlight this for you all as well. So this is just the one sort of key piece of feedback that we got after the sort of introductory meeting, which we weren't expecting a ton to be rolling in after that, but this is, you know, where we'd add that sort of feature set of questions. So if you can read it, it's great, but I'll just sort of cover it. So, you know, thinking about how facility upgrades could impact enrollment. There was specific points about Hamilton High School and some of the addition or like, you know, upgrades, potentially additions that could help improve that school. And then looking at surrounding districts and sort of what features are being added there that are really, you know, seen as helping them out and being added in the recent past to sort of bolster their presence. So again, at the top, we'll start to consolidate this into a higher summary level as we get more feedback, but just wanting to share at the top of the meeting what is relevant there. And then I want to make sure, did anyone have thoughts on meeting notes? I know, again, it was introductory and we spent a good amount of time learning who else was in the room. But we will also check at the top, feedback on meeting notes. Great, okay, and we'll assume everybody's good with that. We'll continue to share them out. You can leave comments in the Google Doc. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to do that. The last piece I'll mention is just the strategic plan survey. So about this time last year, we put quite a few questions in the strategic plan survey to really gain, you know, people's perspectives on the building, try to better understand why people are choosing the schools they do, and really dig in for some base level information to help inform the project. So we want to put more questions in this spring, given that it is a large survey that has a wide reach. The district puts a lot into that. So we'll likely frame these questions around like access to information, awareness of what's going on with the project. But we want to share those questions with you all and the other steering committees as well. So we're getting your input and giving you an opportunity to sort of chime in on those. So just planting that seed, more to come on that. But thank you in advance for your feedback. All right, moving fast through admin stuff. Any questions on any of that? And happy to hang out a little after if there are access issues or anything of that nature. Great. Jumping into the landscape analysis. So again, I'll move through this relatively quickly. But here we just have the, you know, sort of enrollment summary for the city of Milwaukee. So seeing, you know, the city overall, what's happening on an enrollment level. You've got MPS here, and then independent charters and private choice programs as well, and seeing the increases in enrollment with those providers. Moving into showing the distribution and just kind of the change in market share. So MPS has gone from over 2/3 to just over half over that time span since 2008. And just seeing how that is trending downward going forward. Nationally, zooming out, seeing how that does, you know, sort of correlate with what is happening on a national scale, at least with the decline in sort of district enrollment, which has gone down, and then the uptick in charter school enrollment, which their market share has increased by approximately 3%. There is a more modest increase in private schools than there is showing in Milwaukee. So that is one contrast to point out. And then just touching on some more current events. So as it relates to funding changes, one thing we've mentioned at other meetings and in the recording, this is not necessarily representing the total per pupil funding for independent charters and private choice programs. That was not the intent of this, was not to dig into their, you know, funding models, but more so to show. And their per pupil funding, if I'm remembering correctly from what Nick said, is about somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 per pupil. And this has gone up significantly since this state budget had passed. So you can see the increases there. And that is just to show the increase that will sort of come with that in terms of competition for students. So there will now be a sort of higher dollar amount that comes along with every student that is enrolled. And given that there is a heavy emphasis on recruitment from those providers already, we expect that to sort of continue to grow and expand. So From there, just touching on the recent referendum, the impact that it had on the budget. So you'll see the inflation adjusted budget line on the top, and the gray line coming off is the impact that the referendum had. Going forward, just to avoid budget cuts, so I'm sure you're all familiar with that. But going from there, just looking at, so zooming into the per pupil funding in with MPS, the chart on the right is showing in comparison to Metro Milwaukee districts, so nearby districts and their per pupil funding, excuse me. And the chart on the left showing the other largest districts in the state of Wisconsin. It's worth noting that Madison had a referendum that did happen after this chart was made, so that is not reflected here. But you'll notice that, you know, there are some differences there, but it's also just kind of introducing the differences that come along with differences in the student population based on the demographics there. So digging into those a bit, starting with economically disadvantaged students. So knowing that majority of providers in Milwaukee are serving about 80% of their student population is considered economically disadvantaged, and just the high rate of child poverty that exists in Milwaukee in comparison to other large cities in the US. From there, we sort of touched on English learners or ELs, and just the really sort of rapid increase that we're seeing in terms of how many students are English learners and need that support as well within the public education system, as well as other providers in Milwaukee, right? Like you're seeing these numbers climb significantly. And I think it's almost, twice as high as the statewide average just within the city of Milwaukee, which was the same on the economically disadvantaged category as well. And then finally, where you start to see some contrast with MPS and the other providers in the city, students with disabilities. So you see that about 20% of the MPS student population is considered special education students or students with disabilities, whereas independent charters are about half that, and private choice programs are at the bottom here. So we have incomplete data from them. So it's hard to know exactly what that number should be, but even some of the higher estimates do place them just above 3%. So that is really a big difference, and it's something we'll dig into in a little bit, just in terms of how that impacts budget. Before that, zooming out nationally, seeing similar trends with English learners and students with disabilities, even while overall enrollment is dropping. From a staffing perspective, you know, there's been some headlines recently about the vacancies that exist within MPS and the impacts that that's having on students. It is, you know, I think everybody can agree that more staff would be a better outcome, like a better situation for students, but it would also sort of increase and sort of highlight the importance of solving financial challenges that are, you know, sort of, in a sense, there's a bit of like a hole that is plugged with that money that's not being used for those staffing vacancies right now. So just really, not to say that it's an appropriate trade-off, but more so that it highlights the urgency of solving the financial crises. So the last chart here is just showing the teachers to student ratio in MPS. So MPS is this purple line here at the bottom. These are statewide averages across Milwaukee. So the legend is really small here as well, but these are small districts in the state of Wisconsin. Medium is in blue, excuse me, and then green is other large districts. So what this is saying is that MPS is actually unique, and I'd say it's a contrast that there aren't as many staff per student or teachers per student as other districts in the state on average, which means that, you know, it could indicate that a reduction in staff might not be as useful of a strategy as it would be with other districts. So nationally, you are seeing staffing numbers going up a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask this before.
Yeah.
So is it true teachers per student ratio, or is it staff per student ratio?
Thank you for clarifying. They're not necessarily interchangeable, and this was a teachers per student ratio. Yeah, my apologies there. So in this, so again, the legend is small, but you are seeing, so the total staff number is that yellow line in the middle there, that 10%. And this is school district administrative staff. So sort of central office staff at the top, which has really gone up a lot. But also you are seeing instructional staff increasing as well. This is nationwide averages. So, you know, even while, again, enrollment is continuing to decline. So moving into the special education funding, just wanting to highlight, you know, one of the challenges that exists across the state of Wisconsin is the special education funding gap. So for, you know, MPS, that was shown in year 1920 as a $155 million gap that had to be covered using general education funding. So that is that per pupil funding that comes over to cover that. This chart on the bottom just shows federal funding, which has hovered pretty consistently at 15%, other than a spike during coming back from the Great Recession and trying to move from there. There was a one-time uptick, but generally speaking, there is a large gap that is shown there. And what we show on this next slide is just how that gap impacts districts differently. So MPS, given its student body and the demographics, having a higher special education population and economically disadvantaged students, that $2,072 is the $155 million split up per pupil funding. So that is the money that is taken off of general education per pupil funding to cover the gap for special education funding. So for MPS, a higher number, yeah.
Just a question, the last slide you had 2019-20. Is
Yes.
there a reason why we have 4 or 5-year-old data? There is at the last time you can get clean data, or
That is the most recent, clean, complete data I could find. There may be more. I did look for more updated, and it's worth noting. I think I have on the top bullet or one of these bullets that the second one there, that the reimbursement rate in the state has gone up. It's just under a third now, and this was more, I think, in the low 20%. So it is increasing. The state superintendent for Wisconsin is actually calling for it to go up to 60%. So that's what this line is showing, is what it would look like if the funding went up. It would have provided, instead of state funding covering 45 million, it would have covered close to 120 million. So that would be if it were at 60% coverage, and then you would add in that 15% coverage that is coming from federal funds, which given current events, not exactly out of play either in terms of what might change. So hopefully that's,
Yep.
But yeah, just comparing to other districts, so Whitefish Bay, being a district that has a much lower special education student population, as well as economically disadvantaged students, they also have a smaller special education funding gap to be covered, which leaves them for more money per pupil for general education funding. And then last but not least, just showing kind of the number of schools that exist within MPS. So, since 1994, enrollment has dropped by just about 30%, but showing that, the percentage of buildings has only gone down by about 4%. So, you have fewer students in buildings than ever before. It is just sort of dropping there. And that is something you're also seeing nationally, where you actually have more district schools opening up. The number is higher than it has been, even though enrollment is declining pretty significantly in that time. So what this does is just kind of foreshadows and projects some of the challenging, financial decisions that are on the horizon for a lot of districts nationwide. So that was a sort of really quick run through of the landscape analysis. I'll keep moving quickly. One of the things I did say, if you had a machine and were able to bring it, great. This is the reason why, is we are building out like a data dashboard for you all to use that really helps to, sort of slice the data by region to start to compare at that level. And we're still sort of polishing it and everything. And so Lauren's got it pulled up here. And we'll explain what each of these charts is in the coming slides. This one is just like total enrollment by year, so it's a bit simpler. But on the left there, you can select your region or go for all regions if you want to see the district-wide totals. And then once you select a specific region, you can also select a school beneath that to start to look at the school-specific data, which will show up in the bottom left. So you can see the enrollment trends for that school. You can also see the percentage of students from the attendance zone, if there is one. It's not like a citywide school or anything. And so really what we want to do, and there'll be a QR code in a bit here, as well as URL. If you'd like to dig into that, I think we found in the recent meetings that there hasn't necessarily been enough time to sort of fold that into the conversations, but we'll be sending this home with you all as well. And after this meeting, it will get posted to the project website for public consumption. I will note this is not the most mobile friendly tool. We are not software developers, some of you heard me say, so it is much better on a desktop. There's no like SaaS fee attached to it. We are custom building these for MPS and want to leave the district with tools that can be useful going forward. So we are working to sort of build this out for the next few meetings as well. So looking ahead, spoiler alert for the look ahead, is April will be focused on transportation and program. So that's where that like attendance zone conversation might come into play. And then the meeting after that, so in May, we'll be really talking about facilities and the physical structures and just kind of how that all ties it all together. And so those being sort of the three big content heavy meetings for the steering committees. So we'll jump back to the presentation. Again, we'll share the URL for that in a second. But just wanting to run through, so I'm not going to go through every region here. We did, so for each regional steering committee meeting, we showed the district numbers compared to the region and sort of pointed out some differences, but this was just highlighting, you know, the enrollment decline that goes back. And we did talk about grade level configurations. One thing you'll notice on that data dashboard is that we've consolidated grade level configurations just into 4 groupings, which is elementary, K-8, middle, and high school. That is for the sake of simplicity and not seeing like 10 different lines on that chart. And it's a bit harder to follow, given that MPS has several different grade level configurations with its schools. We think that is an important detail to dig into as well, and the challenges and, you know, opportunities that are created with that in terms of standardizing support. We'll dig into that a bit more in the next meeting, but we just didn't want to not speak to why there are only 4 grade level types showing. So this is an example of that. You'll see yellow, and also a really small legend, but yellow is K-8, green is high school, orange is elementary school, and then blue is middle school, which after, you know, moving towards more K-8 models, you'll see that middle schools are generally on the lower end, and just showing, you know, the enrollment decline. So this is going back, I believe, to 2014-15. And you'll see that kind of high schools had like a really stable area, and we're even increasing a bit. This is kind of around the COVID-19 pandemic time where you really start to see those steeper drops. Historic enrollment changes, so this is all on the project website, but this is one of the other charts that is showing. So the one on the data dashboard goes back 5 years, but just shows at an individual school level how much the enrollment has changed over the past 5 years. There are nuances there too. If a school wasn't open, you know, prior to that, it might look like there's a huge spike in enrollment, which is really just the school being established. So it goes from 0 to whatever that enrollment would be. And then this is an interesting one, is just trying to split up the enrollment distribution as it, you know, sort of by the size of the school. So we're qualifying size here by the amount of students who are enrolled, not necessarily the capacity. I will tell you that I know it's tempting to want to go into like the capacity and utilization numbers and everything else that is easily drawn to, and we are going to get into that in the facilities meeting. But right now, just looking at the size of schools by enrollment. So that first line there is 0 to 200 students in a school. From there, you'll see 200 to 400, which is the vast, you know, sort of the biggest representative. So the greatest majority of MPS schools fall into that. And the next one, which is 400 to 600. So it goes up by 200 until the last one, which is 1,000 to 3,000, just for those larger high schools. But this is all broken down by region as well. So you can start to see how that compares. Lastly, just with that attendance zone piece, so just highlighting the percentage of students who are going to their neighborhood schools within MPS. So about 1 in 6 overall are attending their neighborhood schools, and 1 in 10 at a high school level. So yeah.
What kind of boundary do you draw around there to make it an attendance zone?
Yeah, so the attendance zones are pre-existing. I'm not sure. Well, we'll get into that next time with the transportation piece too. And then not all schools have attendance zones too. So yeah, that is there is a lot of like data and line drawing to dig into that piece, but
It was like 2 miles, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Elementaries are like 1.5, high schools I think are 2 for the walk zones, so it
for walk
depends
zones, yeah.
depends on the size, but every school does have a map. I was just saying, I wish I had the data dashboard, because I know they're in there.
Yeah, so sorry, the walk zones and the neighborhood schools are slightly different than like the attendance zones. So, and all that nuance too, we will get into in the next one, but it is important to highlight. So really just wanting to, you know, give some context for those school specific ones that are showing in the data dashboard. So, you know, thank you in advance for your like patience as we continue to add to and polish that. But yeah, hopefully this is helpful to provide you some opportunities to dig into it yourself. Great. Last but not least, I'll move into sort of the regional takeaways. Before I do that, any last questions on this piece? So sort of a little bit horse before buggy here, buggy before horse. Horse before buggy is the right way. But like hopefully you had a chance to review the breakout questions, yeah?
When you guys simplified from the 10 different school compositions to 4, where did you put the schools that were pre-K to 12?
Pre-K to 12, they went into a high school group, I believe. I'll have to check on that, but when you do that drop down, it'll tell you the school type that it is sort of grouped with. So any school that you look at by region will show you what group it sort of falls in.
Cause then that stays the same on this chart as well.
I
Then if
believe
it's a
so.
pre-K to 12 and then a high school.
Yes, I believe the groupings are the same. Yeah. Great question.
When
Yeah.
I shared this information with people after the lease meeting,
Mhm.
they were shocked, they were stunned that it was so little as it is, so I just wanted to say that.
Okay, yeah, and that's, we know that a lot of the challenge too is like getting the information to people in a way that is understandable and like can get in front of them, so thank you for sharing it with them, and I'm glad that it is helpful and insightful. That is absolutely what we're going for. So just to quickly highlight for those breakout discussions, we just wanted to give you a quick download of what we heard. We have members from regional committees here, if you want to put your hands up quick, just to, you're also on a regional committee, and thank you all so much for coming to 2 meetings and hearing some of the overlap pieces. Very grateful for that as well. But just wanting to, the key takeaways from what we heard of the sort of reporting out piece from each region. So I will invite, if there are key details that we haven't captured, I don't think this is meant to be fully comprehensive, but just kind of what was talked about. So, one of the breakout questions was about how families are selecting schools. So talking about the factors influencing choice, and really the impact of like trust and personal networks and word of mouth. From there, like sense of belonging and the impact that can have on retention, and keeping students, even just from like an early age and sort of having a path for them to go on. Equity and opportunities. So knowing like the internal competition that comes with a sort of hybrid decentralized funding approach, which we'll get into in a second. I see Nick has joined us, so I'll invite him up in a bit to sort of give some more context on that front. Engagement was definitely a big focus of just making sure that people know what is out there and what's going on in the schools. And then finally, just some conversation that was happening around like messaging and resource consolidation, how, having fewer schools with more resources, or how you're framing these conversations around really improving the student experience can help people understand better kind of what is going after. I'll try to move quickly through these, and this will all be sent out tomorrow. You will have the full slide deck. We won't make you wait another week, or I guess you probably had to wait a shorter amount of time given that you're the last meeting. But anyway, we want to get you information as quickly as possible. So again, school selection was a big one, and just reputation, word of mouth. Promotion of specialty programs. Again, telling people what's out there is something we heard consistently through a lot of the meetings, is about marketing and how do people know what's going on at the school. So information and perception, parents knowing, families knowing what schools offer, what programs, and sort of what is going on and what they can offer to their students. Class sizes and staffing. So talking about preferences for smaller classes or larger classes with a paraprofessional. And then state performance ratings was one that came up in the Southwest meeting, and just how much that is part of the conversation in terms of what families are looking at and making choices based off of. With Northwest, really talking about visibility and perception, going through the retention through positive promotion. I know this was a big conversation that we had. Sorry, I didn't know if you were but so improving it just by, like, we heard some conversation around how teachers might be telling students about schools that they think they should go to or not go to, and how so much of it is even happening like internally with MPS staff. And so how to change that conversation and really, sort of empower teachers to have a full breadth of awareness around all the great things going on at different schools. The impact that specialized populations are having on enrollment. So if there are ESL programs offered or not offered, or seat availability, and how that is sort of impacting where students are going. Staffing equity, so staffing shortages and the impact that has on schools and their sort of the attractiveness of programs they can support, and which is leading into the central group a bit, but then also the budgeting inequities. So knowing that, with that decentralized component, how that kind of can create some challenges where some schools are really well resourced and others are less so. Moving quickly through this, but we want to make sure we give you all time to talk about it as well. But again, some of the enrollment program offerings, pieces just where, if low enrollment is happening, it can kind of become a cyclical thing. Marketing and perception. So really talking about schools that have stronger social media presences and the impacts that that's having on enrollment. Equity in funding, so creating like a standard of care and staffing models that, you know, are really, every middle school should be expected to have XYZ, every K-8 should have XYZ. And that middle school experience, just how it compares to K-8. And then finally, just like the leadership piece and how there's a perception that strong leadership, you know, is more of a challenge at schools that have less well sort of developed reputations, or that word of mouth piece can be more of a challenge. So I've moved really quickly through all of that, and only so that I know that the regional folks in the room will be able to split up amongst the different breakout groups, and I very much invite you to like build on, expand, revise what I'm saying to make sure that it is authentically representing sort of what was said at those meetings. But otherwise, I'll take a breath and let Nick come to the front. Just instead of what we've been doing in the past meetings, is he's been kind of jumping in on the breakout groups to give a very similar explanation of how the budget works. So we thought adding it at the top would just give more time to sort of break out. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, great, thanks for that. My presentation will probably be, I'll try to go quick, but also not rant too much. I won't put on probably as nice of a show, but I'll do my best. So some of you may have heard my spiel before. My name is Nick Sinram. I'm the Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services here at the district. And I just wanted to give you some insight into how we budget so that you can understand kind of the interconnection between enrollments and budgets. And so here at the district, and in most states, funding follows our student. So that comes both in and out of the district. And then we do the same thing at our schools. So if a kid moves from, you know, outside of the city into our school districts, that money that the state allocates follow them right into our district, and we provide a portion of that directly to the schools, and then a portion of that is used centrally. And so we kind of have three pots of money. There is our school-based, and we kind of think of it as discretionary, although after having some conversations with principals, it doesn't always feel so discretionary. And then we have on the other end of the spectrum our central offices. So that'd be things like HR, finance, facilities. And then we have this kind of middle oxymoron category of centrally funded school accounts. And so that is things like utilities, busing, things that we would get a benefit out of an economy of scale and like a bargaining, a better bargaining position through our contract negotiations. The other kind of category of central spending that we have, though, are things that the district, the board has deemed to be like a equitable, really minimum that we think that our students deserve. And so, in the past, that's been access to computer labs. One of the big pushes that the board has been passionate about is ensuring access for all of our students to art and music. And so those are things that are funded centrally to ensure that all of our kids have access to those different programs and courses and opportunities. So typically how our year goes, we put together projections in the spring, actually right now. And that's tough to do because we don't have all of the information either from the state or from our side of things in terms of enrollment. So we do our best to project what our revenue limit's going to be, what our revenue is going to be, what our enrollment will be. And then we adjust our budget in fall when we actually see how many students have enrolled and are actually countable, and that we can get credit, so to speak, from the Department of Public Instruction. And so what we do is after we count all of our students, and it's not like one single day, literally, there is an opportunity to do a recount if a kid happens to be absent on that day. But the gist of it is on third Friday, the state will give us, about $11,300 per student in terms of like revenue limit. And so that is telling our board that they can raise up to that revenue limit. It's pretty restrictive. And so there's a couple of, the main lever that our board really has is their ability to raise property taxes as a taxing jurisdiction. So once they set that levy, we then distribute those revenues out throughout our schools. And so we've decided for fiscal year 26 that we would distribute $5,000 per pupil out to the schools for what we kind of think of as their discretionary spending. Now, sometimes there's more or less discretion there. Principals first have to fill their, all of their classrooms. They need a licensed teacher at every grade level and filling their core curriculum that are graduation requirements set by the state. And that really does take up a good chunk of their kind of discretionary budget. Now, for where I would encourage all of you to think about is when you have an economy of scale, like a large enough student body at a school, you then have you can provide more efficient services. So you can have more leftover truly discretionary money to fund things that I think most students and parents find interesting. Special programs, STEM labs, vocational training programs. So it's really, that's where you get this benefit is after I have enough students to ensure that I have all my core classrooms filled, then I want to start looking for things that make the school more attractive. And so that's kind of what a density of enrollment allows a principal to do. Some other key kind of finance issues for you to know, we receive a significant amount of grant funding from both the state, federal government, and then also private donors. And so typically, and especially with the state and federal government, we need licensed teachers in those roles to be able to get reimbursement. So that's a major challenge. It's a major challenge for our district. It's a major challenge for most districts in the country. And we're seeing a nationwide teaching shortage. It's very difficult to, even if a principal can afford a teacher, they may not be able to recruit that teacher. So it's just some of the challenges that we face every day in our district. And it's, not totally dissimilar from other school districts, but just maybe a larger scale. So I hope that is a good overview. I know we see some common questions we got. I think one of the most common questions that I got or most interesting was like, what's the sweet spot? At what point do you feel like you start to have that economy of scale? And it's tough to say. It's very different for each grade level. Typically, a high school student requires more funding just because of some of the programs are more expensive, athletics are more expensive. But I would say that this is very anecdotal. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this exactly. But I think that a 150 or 200 student school is very difficult to operate. That does not leave a principal with significant discretionary funds. So if you're talking in elementary school, you probably really need more like 400, 500. If you're talking a high school, I'm gonna say 800 to 1,000. So it's pretty loose, but that's my sense of when you start to get that economy of scale and that efficiency that allows you to offer more interesting programs. Was there any other questions that stood out from?
I think those are big ones. I do want to note too, so Nick and the other sort of content specific folks are going to be floating around as we do the breakout sessions. And I want to make sure that we save time for that too. So there are a couple clarifying points, but I just want to make sure we don't go off. Yeah, go.
So when you referred to the third pot, the central office pot, is that what's often known as the board budget?
No, so it's a good question. We have a lot of kind of slang and lingo around here. Yeah, no.
Okay.
Your board budget is things that are local revenues. You can think of them as non-restricted funds. Typically, we think of board and grant. So that's kind of the slang for board, your internal.
Quick question, you said third Friday isn't really third Friday if a kid was absent. I think it's there. And
Yeah.
I wonder for the schools that have chronic absenteeism issues, at what point do you stop counting the kid that wasn't there on third Friday but may come in?
Someone from student services want to jump in. I think it's what?
So the
Week before,
expectation
week
is that
after.
a student should return within 2 weeks. However, students do come back after that and we are able to come because we do a resubmission of our state count. We do a resubmission of people count more often than you think.
Okay.
Really 4 or 5 times. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think that's good to know.
And then one
I know that.
No.
But I did have one other quick question. Federal grants, is it a big chunk? Are you worried?
Yes, we're absolutely worried. 10% maybe, 190 million.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So talking percentages, so it's 11,000, we said $5,000 goes back to discretionary, that's less than 50%. So I'm just curious about, there's the central office bucket and then the other bucket that's still serving students. The bucket that is centralized, so PE teachers and whatnot that are centralized up, how much is that bucket? So
Well, you're really putting
have
me
we
on the
ever
spot.
looked at how, you know, I mean, like, when you run a nonprofit, one of the things that you're graded on is how much of your is actually going to the thing that you do, how much of it is going to your overhead, so that would be central office, right? So I'm just curious what our numbers look like there, because right now it sounds like less than 50% is going straight to the kids, but that's not quite right, because all the counselors, all the art teachers, all the, you know, are excluded from that, right?
Correct. And the big one, about 240 million is, that I should have mentioned, is our special education. We centrally fund our special education services to ensure that all students have the kind of legal and constitutional right to an education despite, you know, any sort of special needs. And so that's the biggest chunk, 240 million. We think, so about 780 million is our just per pupil. Offices are probably, I really like to go down to my office and check, but I'm gonna say that probably like, let's see, somebody do this process of elimination. We've got about 210 million, that's grants, so that takes us up to about 900 essentially funded. I'm gonna say maybe all in 100 million are truly offices. It's really not, I think the perception is that we have like a very loaded administration. I don't think that that's accurate. I'm sure there's some truth to that, but I think the vast majority of what is not in the discretionary funds truly is in the centrally funded school accounts.
To put it another way, doesn't the district usually say like 90 cents of the dollar goes into the classroom? So like, if you think of it that way, the 10% on the top is like what runs central office, HR functions. And then that other 90% is what kind of gets divided between either the $5,000 discretionary spending or the sped student, like, so like, right, so it's like, it's better maybe to think of it that way. Like the 90% gets divided, some of that is funded by the central office, some of that is like decided by the principal, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And I think that number has been 96%, 96 cents to the dollar. So just from like, when you think of the organizational funding, like I think it's like not aligned with like what a business tries to spend either. Like I think it's even.
Oh, no, I'm not, yeah.
I'm just clarifying because I think that that's like a perception too, is that central office is bloated, but we're right now, and no, I'm not saying that you have that, but right now there's all these other issues that the district is dealing with that maybe are related to that.
Yeah, to put it in perspective, I'm on a nonprofit board and we watch that very closely, our administrative overhead costs. There's organizations that are kind of watchdogs for nonprofits. And typically anything that's, if you're 70% of your spending is on mission focus rather than overhead, that is deemed like reasonable. I think anything below 70%, that's when you start to be looked at skeptically. So, yeah, I think actually that perception that our administrative costs are so high is, I mean, certainly valid, but I would probably disagree. So, yeah.
Just to make sure we save time, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
I'll be floating around if anyone has questions.
So jumping into the small group work, so I'll just quickly, hopefully you've seen the questions already. This is that QR code. We'll share it in the email follow-up that we send tomorrow with all the details too. If you want to write it down, it's just MPS LRF&P dashboard with dashes in between. But just highlighting those 3 bullets on the bottom, I'm not going to read through each one. It's really just some of the norms and expectations piece, which is an insert that you have in your binder, but one that's come up a lot is just like thinking about that equity of voice, so making sure everybody in your group has a chance to sort of share their perspective, as well as like accepting non-closure. The goal is not to like solve problems definitively here or come up with like surgical solutions is really just to establish that shared knowledge base. So as we go through this meeting and the transportation meeting and the facilities meeting, we want everybody to have sort of that really comprehensive understanding of what are the challenges that are, sort of related to this project, so that when we start getting into the conversation around selecting strategies and prioritizing schools and talking about implementation, that we're doing so like with eyes wide open and sort of that shared understanding piece. So I won't say anything more on that front. These were sent out ahead of time. We will also have like handouts I can share them. I will just say on these questions, you do not need to go in order. You do not need to answer every question. The fourth one that is verbose is basically just talking about that internal competition piece and how like that, sort of hybrid decentralized budgeting creates some of those resource gaps and everything. So that is the super short version of that. But yeah, otherwise we're gonna split up and just kind of help facilitate the conversation. So we'll join you, I'll run around and give time checks. But I think we'll have time to really dig in for the next 30 minutes. Again, so that we don't have to have everybody all in this room. I'm trying to do a quick count. I think we've got 19 people, so maybe 4 groups of 5 and then 1 of 4. If we want to have, I'm thinking maybe this group. We have the other room next door, and then y'all as well. It probably makes sense to do like a kitty corner thing. So a group in the back, if we can find a way to sneak you out that door, they all go to the same way. And then maybe if one of y'all want to come join this table, and if I can ask one of y'all to come join this table. And so we'll say this front right table, table 1, table 2, table 3, table 4, table 1, table 3 to the other room, table 2 and 4 stay in this room. Just put numbers on the table. Stay out of it.
We are leaving?
But yes, if one of y'all can come join. So we want to balance the numbers, yes.
We're not leaving.
No.
You are not.
I was gonna say, we're leaving.
Yes.
Not like we're leaving.
Oh, you like your game now.
I was gonna say,
Good, yeah, it's really good. Didn't have school today because we had the ACTs, so.
And then if I
That's
my
late
son
this
will-
year. That's late this year.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Could be, except that.
I'm totally indifferent, so whoever.
Oh.
Yeah, we used to do that everywhere.
I'm just happy today.
Yeah.
My son's back at his old grade school, I told him my ear,
Aw.
and last, he goes to a private high school, but they have a senior, like a service project for 2 weeks, and they sent about 4 kids back to Golda, most of whom are graduates. It's for you.
Okay.
Yeah, it felt like
Oh, yeah, I know, yeah.
You guys want to share that one?
Sure, it doesn't matter.
Are we stopping the recording?
Yeah.
The whole thing, or?
1750.
Right.
They said 3,000 was in the 70s.
Yeah, there were probably 3,000 at one point, but yes, that's not normal.
That building was with about 1,000 students when I started. It was down to about 5.
I just did that.
It's a shame
You've been
because it
going
really, 2020, February of 2020, I got hired by the state. I was recruited away, like, to be entirely honest.
All right. We want to wind down and come back together. I want to make sure we have a few minutes for each group to sort of share out.
That's such an example of a building that interaction wouldn't take place.
Okay. I think we've got everybody back in the room, so if I can grab your attention back at the front. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have time for folks to share, so.
Oh, thank you.
Does any table feel inspired and want to go first, just to give a run through of the highlights of what you all were discussing?
Sure.
All right, let me see if we can get everybody. If I can get y'all's attention, please. We'll jump into the share outs, making sure that we save a couple minutes for everybody. And Table 4 has volunteered to go first. Go ahead.
So we talked a lot, spent a lot of time on number 1 about kind of the factors in enrollment. We said a lot depends on like the background and experience of people's personal networks and what they thought. We also talked a lot about information and information that is or isn't given to families, students, and what information does or doesn't kind of filter out of those networks to people. We kind of got into some discussion about how different sides of the city and different perceptions and like where things come from, like walk zones. I'm in the central region meeting last night. We talked a lot about like safety and people in feeling safe walking to school in the central region. So that's a reason why a lot of people will pick schools out of the region for their students. We said a lot about word of mouth and how just that is really an important part of it. We then got into a lot of discussion about the process of how a student, or I should say a family, would enroll and how kind of complicated that can be and how there's probably some better ways to make that a little bit more friendly, potentially, while not creating solutions and leaving time for closure, kind of brainstorming different things that may or may not happen. Then we kind of we finished a little bit talking about like the funding system and how kind of one of the things in the central region we talked about is like having a standard of care for the school and how do we figure out what that looks like and how do we hit that, knowing that capacity at certain buildings isn't as high as might be needed in order to hit the numbers that currently exist for like getting things like an assistant principal.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Do we want to just go in a clockwise rotation here? Table 3. Put you on the spot.
We focused mostly, I think, on question 3, talking about larger versus smaller schools and what the approach should be. And I think as a group, we sort of acknowledged that we all kind of understood that there are schools that are too small and that's inefficient and that changes need to be made to get schools more to an optimal size. And then we talked a lot about the challenges involved with that, and I don't think we really concluded a whole lot about how to overcome those challenges. We talked a lot about territorialness and how to overcome perceived differences between regions and different spaces, and how to do that in an equitable and fair way. And I don't know if we can.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, definitely coming up with a solution wasn't a requirement. But yeah, great. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Table 2.
Selected to speak here. We talked, kind of jumped around the question list, but we had some really great conversations around why parents select schools, looking at really tangible things like work schedule and busing schedules. We did talk about safety and perception of safety and how to begin to think about untangling that knot. We talked about the access to before and after school care, so again, having to do with that scheduling. And I think one really great idea that kind of came from the group was that Tony really added to this was that, you know, in thinking about the map, there should be a school that has, you know, the various different start times that is relatively close to you, and a school that's a traditional neighborhood school, a language school, a science school, so you should have access within your zone, whatever that zone is, to a wide variety of options. And we talked a little bit about sixth grade and ninth grade academies, or maybe even broader, just really focusing on the first couple of weeks of school as a culture building activity and setting the mood for the rest of the year. And then there were other thoughts, but we talked a little bit about, you know, how can we mathematically model the right size, because it may be financially efficient to have a really huge school, but we could totally miss the goals that we're shooting for. So where does that student achievement and yet having enough size that you can have all of the different things kind of come together?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, wonderful. Last but not least, table one.
All right, the first thing that came up for us was actually marketing communications. I did not bring it up. I swear.
Glad it was brought up.
And it was, you know, the first thing was basically that like the schools that market themselves better have better outcomes. And so we talked about like what kind of resources go into that, what kind of resources are available. And, you know, we talked about basically how, you know, the schools that have the best resources are able to do that because of just the way that things are distributed. So if you have a school with 100 students, they're probably using all of their resources on just staffing. And we started, you know, that kind of rolled into how can there be better marketing efforts at the neighborhood level. And it was brought up, some schools have, people are attracted to them because of like their population. So like if they have an ethnic population, what can we, they may travel across the city to go to a school that has an ethnic population, even though, you know, on the Northwest side, for example, there's like a Hmong population, but a lot of Hmong families go to the South side for school. Why don't they just stay on that part of town? So, you know, maybe there's some potential outreach that could be done that's marketing, but it's also recruitment to try and make connections within neighborhoods to get people to just stay where they live and know that they have the resources there if they want them. We talked a lot about perception and how there's just a negative perception of the district in general. And we talked a little bit about how sometimes, you know, the conversations that staff have, you know, about their schools or about other schools, that sometimes drives the negative perception. And maybe if MPS were able to put more resources towards like its own HR and building a culture and a morale, you may have more advocates in the school district who are talking positively about their own schools and about their neighboring schools. And that might actually be a good way to get more people to believe in the district. You see people who say, oh, I worked at an MPS school, and believe me, I wouldn't send my kids there. Well, how do we, you know, change that? There's 10,000 staff and so many families. So, you know, that might be something that could have a tangible impact. We spoke about staffing and how families really care about the teachers that they have, and do they actually have a certified teacher in their classroom? What kind of policies could retain teachers or get them to get their certification more quickly? And it was brought up that there used to be a policy in the past where teachers couldn't leave after they stayed in the school for 3 years. They had to stay in the school for 3 years, and that policy has changed, and that might be something that leads to fewer schools having staff who are dedicated to a certain building and know their student population and their families. I think that was, did I miss anything? Is that it? Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you all so much for sharing. Yeah, really happy to hear that, you know, it sounds like really different conversations happening at different tables, which is great. And, you know, we'll be pulling everything together too to share out notes that we got from each of the regions, so make sure to share those with everybody here. So just quickly touching on that community insights piece, if you wanna, this is that same QR code from the very first slide. We have refreshed that, so if you wanna take a look at the submissions that are there already, you can see what all the other regions have suggested for what might be good questions to be posing to the wider community. You can also feel free to upvote the ones you like. It helps us understand like kind of what is resonating for folks. Or feel free to drop in your own questions. So QR code is there, it's kind of, and it is that same one. So yeah, we'll keep this live until the end of the week and then wanting to get those questions up. So all that'll be outlined in the survey. But yeah, Aaron, if we want to jump back to the presentation, we can just wrap up here, wanting to be respectful of folks' time. So really just the next piece is just kind of the look ahead. So for April, we'll be talking about transportation and programming. And so we'll have some of the folks from the transportation here team joining us to kind of discuss those points. If you want to take a look at the programs page on the website, if you haven't done that already, that'll be helpful. There is that shared resource library. We'll start putting stuff in there too. But if y'all want to like populate things, like anything that would be helpful context or articles or how other districts are facing challenges, I know that's come up a few times. That might be similar and an interesting perspective to take. Feel free to use that. And then, yeah, these are just kind of those take-home pieces. So again, we'll send out the slides tomorrow, just kind of a follow-up survey. We do read everything that gets submitted there and, are trying to adjust these meetings accordingly to make sure they are really as effective as possible and a good use of your time. So thank you so much in advance for your continued feedback on that. We don't want to do this just one way. We want to make sure that we are really trying to make the most of this time that you're all taking to be here. So thank you so much. Happy to hang around for a few minutes if there are any lingering questions, but want to give people a chance to, get home and wrap on time. So thanks again.
Thank you. Carlos, were you reading Ghost in the Schoolyard?
Yeah.
That's why I was like, oh yeah. Keep going.